Boeing just lost $13.5 billion to SpaceX. In one devastating blow, their 20-year military space monopoly is over. SpaceX now controls 28 out of 54 of America's most classified launches. We're talking spy satellites, missile defense systems, the stuff that keeps America safe. Boeing went from launching everything to, well, watching from the sidelines. But here's what makes this terrifying. China is racing to deploy 10,000 satellites to dominate space. Who's going to stop them? Only SpaceX has the speed and firepower to fight back. How did this happen so fast, and what does this mean for the future of American defense? Let's dive right in. The empire that ruled space for 2 decades. United Launch Alliance owned everything, and I mean everything. For 20 years, every spy satellite, every missile warning system, every piece of classified hardware that kept America alive, all flew on ULA rockets. Boeing and Lockheed Martin had built the perfect fortress. Their success rate? 100% when it mattered most. But perfection came with a price tag that would make your jaw drop. Each ULA launch cost the Pentagon over $400 million. That's more money than most countries spend on their entire defense budget for one rocket. The military paid it because they had no choice. Who else could handle nuclear early warning satellites? Who else had clearance for America's deepest secrets? The answer seemed obvious. Nobody. ULA executives slept well at night, knowing their monopoly was unbreakable. After all, national security isn't something you gamble with, right? You stick with the proven winner, no matter the cost. But while they were celebrating, a small company in California was building something that would destroy their empire forever. The startup that dared to dream the impossible. SpaceX was nothing more than Elon Musk's crazy fantasy. Fresh from selling PayPal, Musk walked into aerospace conferences making an outrageous claim. He could cut launch costs by 90%. Industry veterans didn't just laugh, they nearly fell out of their chairs. NASA executives rolled their eyes. Boeing's leadership probably didn't even know SpaceX existed. Here's the brutal truth about impossible dreams. Sometimes they come true in the most devastating way possible. SpaceX's first rocket exploded. Second rocket exploded. Third rocket, you guessed it, exploded. Musk was burning through his fortune so fast that SpaceX was literally 48 hours away from complete bankruptcy. The entire aerospace industry was watching and waiting for the inevitable collapse. This is what happens when tech bros try to build rockets, they whispered. Then September 28th, 2008 happened. Falcon 1 finally reached orbit. The 4th time was the charm. And in that moment, everything changed. But the military still wasn't buying it. National security launches required something ULA had spent decades building. Absolute trust. How do you trust a company that almost died 4 times? How do you put billion-dollar spy satellites on rockets that used to be expensive fireworks? SpaceX had exactly one option. Prove they weren't just cheaper, they were better. The lawsuit that shook Washington. SpaceX did something that shocked the entire defense establishment. They sued the United States Air Force, not for money, for the right to compete. Think about the audacity of that move. A private company taking on the Pentagon because they weren't allowed to bid on military contracts. Most companies would never dare challenge the military-industrial complex. But Musk wasn't most people. The lawsuit exposed something absolutely embarrassing. ULA was using Russian rocket engines. Yes, you heard that correctly. America's most sensitive satellites, the ones protecting us from Russia, were launching on engines built by Russia. Congress went ballistic. How could we depend on Putin's engines to defend America? The same engines that could be cut off at any moment if relations soured? ULA scrambled to explain, but the damage was done. They promised new American-made rockets, but development takes years. SpaceX was already flying. The court case ended with SpaceX winning the right to compete. But winning the right to bid and actually winning contracts? Those are 2 completely different wars. The performance revolution nobody saw coming. February 6, 2018. The day that changed everything. SpaceX launched Falcon Heavy for the first time. Not with some boring test payload, but with Musk's personal Tesla Roadster, complete with a dummy astronaut listening to David Bowie. The world watched in absolute amazement as two boosters landed simultaneously back at Cape Canaveral. It was pure theater, but the math behind it was devastating. Falcon Heavy could lift more than ULA's Delta IV Heavy at one-third the cost. Pentagon accountants couldn't ignore numbers like that. But the real shocker was still coming. 2024 was the year SpaceX completely broke the system. They completed 138 out of 145 total U.S. orbital launches. Let me say that again. SpaceX launched more rockets than the entire rest of America combined. ULA? They managed just 7 launches that same year. 7 out of 145. Speed matters in the space race. When China tests a new anti-satellite weapon, America needs surveillance capabilities deployed immediately. Waiting 2 years for a ULA launch slot? That wasn't acceptable anymore. But raw numbers only tell part of this incredible story. The capability gap that destroyed ULA's dreams. The National Security Space Launch Phase 3 contract had requirements that seemed tailor-made for traditional providers. Dual-coast launch capability, vertical integration facilities, direct-to-geostationary orbit insertion. ULA checked most boxes. On paper, reality told a much different story. Their West Coast launch capabilities? Still unproven after years of promises. Vulcan rocket development? Plagued by endless delays. Meanwhile, SpaceX was already activating Space Launch Complex 6 at Vandenberg, turning promises into operational reality. But here's where SpaceX didn't just meet requirements. They completely redefined what was possible. Need a satellite launched within 90 days? SpaceX could do it. Need multiple payloads deployed in different orbits during one mission? Already happening. Need rapid replacement for a failed satellite? SpaceX's reusable rockets made it economically viable for the first time in history. ULA's entire business model was built on perfect reliability for carefully scheduled missions. SpaceX's model was built on rapid response to changing threats. Guess which approach the Pentagon needed more in an era of rising Chinese aggression? The $13.5 billion earthquake. When the Phase 3 awards were announced, the numbers told a story of complete domination. SpaceX, 28 missions, $5.9 billion. ULA, 19 missions, $5.3 billion. Blue Origin, 7 missions, $2.3 billion. Wait, SpaceX got nearly 50% more missions for roughly the same money as ULA? The Pentagon was getting almost double the capability for the same budget. ULA executives had to be staring at those numbers in complete disbelief. How did we go from owning everything to barely one-third of the market? How did a company that didn't exist 20 years ago just steal our empire? The answer lies in something most people don't understand about modern warfare. The China threat that changed the game. This isn't just about launching satellites anymore. This is about survival. Nearly 70% of these missions directly counter China's aggressive space expansion. Beijing isn't just building satellites, they're weaponizing orbit. Anti-satellite missiles that can blind American surveillance. Cyber warfare capabilities that can hijack military communications. Surveillance networks that track every American military movement in real time. China's plan? Deploy over 10,000 satellites by 2030. That's not speculation, that's their official government timeline. America's current satellite constellation? About 3,000 total. Do the math. If China can deploy 3 times faster than America can respond, they win orbital dominance. Game over. ULA's traditional approach of perfect, methodical launches suddenly became a luxury America couldn't afford. When you're facing an existential threat, speed trumps perfection every single time. SpaceX's rapid reusability wasn't just about cost savings anymore, it was about national survival. When you can relaunch the same rocket within weeks instead of building new ones over years, you can respond to threats in real time. But then came the twist nobody saw coming. The Blue Origin bombshell. Jeff Bezos' space company winning 7 missions shocked everyone, including Blue Origin themselves. Their New Glenn rocket had flown exactly once before the contract awards, 1 test flight. Why would the Pentagon bet $2.3 billion on a completely unproven vehicle? The answer reveals the Pentagon's deepest nightmare. What happens if SpaceX fails? What happens if Musk has another Twitter meltdown and threatens to halt military launches? What if a single point of failure cripples America's entire space defense? By giving Blue Origin a significant foothold, the military created insurance against SpaceX monopolization. But this decision carries enormous risk. Blue Origin has never launched a national security payload. Their track record is essentially zero. If New Glenn encounters problems, and rocket development always encounters problems, those 7 missions will likely end up reassigned to SpaceX anyway. The Pentagon is playing geopolitical chess, betting they can create real competition before SpaceX becomes too powerful to challenge. But what if they're already too late? The reality behind those mission numbers. Let's talk about what these missions actually do. Because this isn't just business, this is the infrastructure of American global power. When SpaceX launches NRO 96, they're deploying America's most advanced spy satellite, technology so classified that even its basic capabilities are national secrets. These satellites can detect nuclear missile launches within seconds. They can read license plates from 200 miles up. They can intercept enemy communications across the globe. When they handle USSF 186, they're building the backbone of future space warfare. Communication networks that coordinate military operations across continents. Navigation systems that guide precision weapons to their targets. ULA used to handle these missions with months of ceremony and preparation. Every launch was treated like a national event. SpaceX treats them like routine Tuesday operations. They can integrate a classified payload and launch within weeks if the situation demands it. That agility is worth more than any cost savings. In modern warfare, the side that can adapt fastest wins everything. The domino effect that's just beginning. Here's what makes SpaceX's victory even more devastating for Boeing. This is just the opening move. Starship is coming. When that monster rocket becomes operational, it will make Falcon Heavy look like a toy. Starship can carry 100 tons to orbit compared to Falcon Heavy's 64 tons. More importantly, it's designed for rapid reuse with minimal refurbishment between flights. The cost per kilogram to orbit could drop to levels that make current rockets look like luxury antiques. Boeing's space division isn't just losing contracts. They're watching their entire business model become obsolete in real time. How do you compete with a company that can launch more payload for less money with faster turnaround times? The brutal answer is, you probably can't. The political time bomb. But SpaceX's dominance creates dangerous new problems that nobody wants to talk about. Elon Musk's public feuds with politicians have already threatened government contracts. Remember when he criticized certain tax proposals and faced potential contract cancellations worth $22 billion? His control over America's space infrastructure gives him unprecedented influence over national security decisions. What happens if Musk decides to halt Dragon capsule operations during a political dispute? What if SpaceX's commercial priorities conflict with Pentagon requirements? The military traded ULA's predictable reliability for SpaceX's innovative chaos. This tension will only intensify as SpaceX's market share grows. Success in capitalism often leads to monopoly concerns, and SpaceX is rapidly approaching monopoly-level control over American space access. The irony is brutal. The Pentagon broke up ULA's monopoly, only to create an even more dominant monopoly under SpaceX. The global power shift. This story extends far beyond American borders. Allied nations are watching SpaceX's rise with a mixture of admiration and deep concern. European space companies can't compete with SpaceX's pricing structure. Russian space capabilities are crumbling under international sanctions. China remains the only nation investing at the scale needed to challenge American space dominance. But here's the kicker. SpaceX's military contracts essentially subsidize their commercial operations. Every Pentagon dollar helps fund Starlink development, Starship construction, and Mars colonization plans. This creates a competitive advantage that foreign companies simply cannot match. Every Starlink launch benefits from technology and infrastructure paid for by American taxpayers through military contracts. The result? American space companies are pulling away from international competition at a pace that hasn't been seen since the original space race. This technological gap could define global power relationships for the next 50 years. Nations that can't access space independently become dependent on those who can. And right now, that increasingly means becoming dependent on SpaceX. Here's the uncomfortable truth that defense officials are losing sleep over. America's space security now depends almost entirely on one man's company. SpaceX's success created exactly the kind of single point of failure that the Phase 3 contract was supposed to prevent. If something happens to SpaceX, if their facilities face cyber attacks, natural disasters, or operational failures, America's military space capabilities could be crippled overnight. The Pentagon thought they were buying resilience by supporting multiple providers. Instead, they may have accidentally created the most dangerous dependency in modern military history. And the scariest part? There might not be any way to fix it without starting over completely. So Boeing didn't just lose a contract. They lost the future of American space power. So here's what just happened. Boeing's 20-year space empire, gone. SpaceX didn't just win a contract, they rewrote the rules of American space power forever. But this story raises bigger questions that nobody's asking yet. When one company controls the high ground of orbit, who really holds the keys to global security? And what happens when commercial ambition meets national survival? The space race isn't slowing down, it's accelerating. China's building their orbital fortress. SpaceX is scaling Starship for military use. New players like Rocket Lab are fighting for their piece of the action. The next 5 years will determine whether America maintains space dominance or whether we're watching the birth of something entirely new, a future where private companies don't just support national defense, they define it. What do you think? Is SpaceX's dominance the best thing for American security or the most dangerous gamble we've ever made? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want to stay ahead of the space revolution that's reshaping